and the official line.
We all decided we need to tell our story. We don't want to rely on the authority and its media.
The Listening Post on Aljazeera.
You don't lose your narrative if I answer your question.
I don't have a narrative, I have a question. Join me, Rochelle Carrion, up front as my guests from around the world take the hot seat and we debate the week's top stories and pressing issues here on Al Jazeera.
The number of recorded coronavirus cases in India surpasses 10 million. The government says it expects to start vaccinations in January. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. This is Al Jazeera, live from Doha. Also coming up, US regulators approved the Moderna vaccine for emergency use, the second within a week. But the pandemic is far from being contained. A former governor in Mexico's Jalisco state becomes the latest victim of drug-related violence that's spiraling out of control. And why Venezuela's president has dissolved his constituent assembly without it changing a word of the constitution. Now, the number of coronavirus cases in India has now passed 10 million. That's according to official data released by government agencies in the last hour. India has the second highest number of cases in the world behind the US, although recorded infection rates have fallen sharply in recent weeks. Elizabeth Paranam has more now from New Delhi.
India has surpassed 10 million recorded coronavirus cases, with the Supreme Court saying the COVID-19 pandemic spread like wildfire in the country because of a lack of implementation of guidelines to stop it. It's asking for better cooperation between the central and state governments. It's also asking the central government to find a way to give more time off to frontline healthcare workers who it said are exhausted physically and mentally from 8 months of tireless work. The good news is that the number of daily cases, the daily rise in cases, is the lowest it's been since mid-July. That's despite the fact India is testing more people now than it was then, but health experts say it's still not testing as many as it should be. Meanwhile, the Indian government is busy planning the first phase of vaccinations, which are expected to begin in January. Pfizer, Serum Institute of India, which is the world's largest vaccine maker and is testing and manufacturing the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and another Indian company called Biotech have all applied for emergency authorization. And the Indian government has said that it could soon start voluntary inoculations as it considers emergency use. It's planning to vaccinate around 300 million people in the first phase, which it expects will last the first half of 2021.
US regulators have approved a second coronavirus vaccine, and mass inoculations are expected to start within days. Tests show the Moderna jab is more than 94% effective when administered in 2 doses 4 weeks apart. Its approval came just hours after the vice president was given the Pfizer vaccine live on television in a bid to build support for the rollout. Alan Fisher begins our coverage from the White House.
All right.
This was a very public vote of confidence in the coronavirus vaccine. The Vice President, his wife and the US Surgeon General getting an injection live on TV. They want to assure Americans that the vaccine works and it's safe.
The American people deserve to know that we've never been more prepared to combat the coronavirus than we are today. And even while we see cases rising and hospitalizations rising and heartbreaking losses, we'll continue to marshal the resources that we have secured as a nation, including a safe and effective vaccine, to meet this moment.
Senior members of the White House coronavirus team were also at the event. The most recognisable, Dr. Anthony Fauci, insisting the vaccine's finally providing a light at the end of what's been a very long tunnel.
As we get into January, February, March, and April, that light is going to get brighter and brighter, and the bitterness is going to be replaced by the sweetness. And we all hope, and I think this is doable, that by the time we get to several months into this year, we will have enough people protected that we can start thinking seriously about the return to normality.
Not at the event in the old Executive Office building, right next door to the White House itself. The President. Instead, he was tweeting out allegations without proof that the presidential election had been stolen from him. His spokesperson says he's open to getting the vaccine. There are just no plans to do that at the moment. For the second Friday in a row, regulators in the US approved a vaccine, the Food and Drug Administration giving emergency use authorization to Moderna. That'll mean 6 million doses being sent out in the coming days. And because the drug doesn't have to be stored at extreme low temperatures, it can be used in more locations, more than 3,000 initially. But while the vaccines provide some good news, the scale of the problem in the US is actually growing. More than 3,000 deaths a day in recent days, hospitalizations at record numbers, health providers across all 50 states warning they're close to breaking point. And with families planning to gather in a week for the Christmas holiday, experts are worried that'll create another deadly spike that will cast a shadow into the new year. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
The World Health Organization has warned that the next 3 to 6 months will be tough during the wait for coronavirus vaccines to help reduce transmission. Its Health Emergencies Director says countries with a high number of cases should still expect their infection rates to rise, particularly in the Americas.
Over 3/4 of the cases, we're seeing globally now are occurring in the Americas. It's a very, very high and intense period there. And it really does come back to being able to implement all of the measures that are needed, having strong coordination and governance, having a do-it-all approach in terms of both public health and social measures, advice to people on wearing masks and personal hygiene, and having a very strong focus on surveillance and testing.
And the World Health Organization's vaccine initiative says it's secured nearly 2 billion doses of vaccines for people in low and middle-income countries. The COVAX Alliance is aiming to deliver approved vaccines to 190 countries during the first half of next year. It's now doubled its supply after signing deals with Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. In Europe, the second wave of COVID-19 shows no sign of slowing. Italy is being placed under a nationwide lockdown over both Christmas and New Year, with bars, restaurants and non-essential shops closing. Austria's government is imposing a third lockdown, while in Germany, temporary freezers are being used to store bodies after a spike in deaths. Rory Challens reports.
In the German city of Hanau, they've run out of space for bodies in the hospital morgues. A cooled shipping container is being used to temporarily handle the overflow.
Unfortunately, the situation in Hanau has changed. We now need to make use of our containers that we have had here since April, initially as a precaution. Since yesterday, 2 COVID-19 deceased are here. In total, 25 deceased can be stored in the container, and sadly, we had to start using the container from yesterday.
With a record of nearly 34,000 new cases and 813 new deaths, Germany has lost its position as a role model for how to handle the pandemic well, though vaccinations are set to start after Christmas.
The imminent probable approval of the first vaccine naturally gives us hope, but obviously it won't solve the problem. And realistically, we need to be prepared that the months of January and February will be the hardest months of this pandemic.
Several European